It's the Sleepers Podcast. It's G. With me again is Cart, and we are in some good moods tonight. Isn't that right, Cart?
Hey, feeling good, man. Big things coming for Sleepers. This is the year of the Sleepers. I'm feeling good. G, I mean, no one can really knock our mood right now, I feel like.
No, some exciting things are happening. I'm excited to share some of this with the world. Hopefully more exciting things coming, but we've had some big guests. A big one on this very episode. We're going to be speaking with the man, the myth, the legend himself, Ken Pomeroy. That is in the second half of this episode. But first, we also landed the official sponsor of the Sleepers Podcast, the Locker Room app. Carter and I have had quite a few experiences on the Locker Room app in the past year. They have a great thing going on over there. So, Carter, I'm going to throw it to you to talk first about our lovely sponsor.
Yeah, so, I mean, me and G been using Locker Room for a couple months now, I think, actually. We were there from the beginning of it. It's a very dope app. Basically, it's just connecting sports fans and, honestly, fans of anything. There's bachelor rooms, there's rooms on culture, there's rooms on sports, really anything. And it's just connecting a bunch of people and giving the opportunity to just talk with other people. It's a great app to use. It's free. There's also big time athletes that are using this app. I recently I was in a room with James Wiseman, and he even brought you up and he talks to you in the room. So it's a really dope app. Really excited about this. And also I need to take this time to do my little dance break in celebration, if you don't mind. Yeah.
At a boy. Don't let Cat get hot. Don't let him. All right. So as you can see, we're excited, as we should be, as anybody should be. If you're listening to this, if you're a new listener to the Sleepers Podcast, you may not have heard of the Locker Room app. You should check it out. You can get it available in the iTunes store. Is it called the iTunes store? App store?
Yeah, or App Store, yeah.
App store. I'm new at this. All right, folks. Give me some slack. But check it out. The app is dope. I've been connected with athletes from all sorts of different sports, and I met a ton of different cool people on there. So if you're a sports fan, if you like our podcast, I'm sure you will love the app. And honestly, Cart, I wasn't planning on this little intro segment to be our ad read for Locker Room, but that's about the best ad read we're going to give them, right?
Yeah, and it would be. And also, you can't beat the fact that the Sleepers are going to be on the Locker Room hosting rooms. So you guys can talk to us directly. So now when you hear Greg say some dumb shit about Michigan, you can just talk to him about it right at that point. You don't have to wait till after the episode's released.
How dumb has my dumb Michigan shit been this year?
It hasn't been that dumb, to be honest with you.
I think I said, they'd be one spot higher than Michigan State preseason? And people told me I was crazy?
But I also remember going through the outline of this episode, and there was a rule in bold and it said no Michigan and Michigan State talking. And here we go.
So I'm sorry. We're in happy moods because our teams are winning too. This is also the first time this year we both feel good about our teams. What can we do?
Haven't lost in 2021.
Haven't lost. Let's keep it that way. I don't know if the Sleepers have lost either, but shit.
Check the numbers. Check the scoreboard.
Let's curse ourselves. By the way, Daily Picks, put some respect on my name, folks. At GWizzy12 on Twitter. Again, haven't lost a day since 2021. Space Heater G is in full effect. I can see it right now. It's underneath the desk. So look, get with the movement is all we're trying to say. We're going to have a bunch of cool episodes of this podcast on an ongoing basis. Carter and I are always talking hoops, but we're talking way more than that. And we're getting the biggest names in the world of basketball from all over to come join us. So thank you to everybody that's been listening so far. It's been a blast. Hopefully this is the start of something very special. And with that, let's get into some college hoops talk before we go to Mr. Ken Pomeroy. Oh, I was hoping I was going to hear that, but you moved it away from the mic.
Oh, damn it. Well, let's do it.
There we go. All right. So actually, the first thing that we listed on this little outline that we want to talk about is the fact that Carter is bad at moments. This is a little meta, but Cart, why don't you give the people an example of what you're talking about there?
So when things happen, let's say if I'm at work and I make a big sale or something good happens with the Sleepers, for example, I just have a hard time, I don't know, celebrating, getting excited about it. I'm just a killer in this world. I just got a killer mindset. I'm just on to the next thing. I don't get happy about anything in this life. But that's not true because I'm a happy person. So I don't really get how it works. I don't know.
Like I've called you a couple times in the past couple weeks and been like, yo, we just landed a pretty big guest, like Mr. Ken Pomeroy. We were very excited about that.
Mhm.
And I'm like, yo, we should like have a little FaceTime drink or something to celebrate. And you look at me like I'm nuts.
I was already on to the next episode. No disrespect to Ken Pom, but I'm striving for greatness.
So is this an all life thing for you? Like when Michigan State wins, like, is there a moment in your head that is like an emotional, happy moment for you in Michigan State basketball history?
I send out a tweet, maybe a celebratory TikTok, but then I'm on to the next one after that. Never complacent, never comfortable.
Like it's just a pack and then you're beyond?
Yeah, basically.
Okay. I mean, what about, let's go personal. What about your engagement? You got engaged in the last year. I got to imagine that was a special moment, right?
Yeah, it was special, but after that weekend, I was on to the wedding, on to the budgeting.
I just don't buy that. Like I know you. I've been with you for moments where we've been very happy together. Like, the good old emotional bro friend moment.
Yeah, and I am happy, and those moments are real, but at the same time, I don't know, just how I was built, man.
Luther built a man who does not celebrate moments, is what I've been told.
Yeah, I'm an emotionless person, if that makes any sense, or the Drizzy.
It doesn't, but
Okay.
all right.
Well,
I won't psychoanalyze
good
you.
thing this isn't a podcast to break down my emotional state and who I am as a person.
You're right. You're right.
Like,
The people are here for hoops. The people are here for hoops. So let's give them hoops. But just know that I don't really buy the whole Carter psychopath, not emotional moment guy thing. Like, I mean, I've got an emotional hoops moment I'd like to share. Trey Burke hits the step back shot against Kansas. I can tell you exactly where I was and the feelings that I felt. I was at a surprise birthday party, and literally, I kid you not, the birthday person walked in the room, opened the door as the shot went in the air, and everyone yelled surprise while the shot was in the air. And I was on all fours in front of the TV begging for it to go in, and it went in. And I went around crying, screaming, and everyone thought I was celebrating the birthday girl who will not be named. I love you, birthday girl. I really do. You know who you are. But that was a bigger moment for me. And that's a moment I'll never forget. And I had an emotional moment, and that's a good thing. You're telling me you're never going to have one of those?
I'm proud of you for being able to admit on this podcast that you, as a man, got on all fours to celebrate a basketball shot. Not mad at you for that. But I can't decide if it's either between the Louisville Cardinals, that half where Luke Hancock hit 4 back-to-back threes and then they took the lead at half, or when they called the foul on Trey Burke on Peyton Siva. Those are like my top two where I really connect to where I was emotionally. But besides that, I don't really know.
I'm never going to call you before a podcast recording again and offer to take a shot with you. Never again. I mean, you are just crossing a line here.
I'm sorry.
All right, let's move on. I'll accept that you're bad at moments, apparently, whatever that means. And hopefully we can move on from this. So last week on this podcast, we gave out a list of teams that we said we believed could win a national championship. This was the only group that we believed could actually win a title this season. There are 10 teams on the list. I'm going to run through them really quickly. Gonzaga, Baylor, Tennessee, Illinois, Wisconsin, Kansas, Texas Tech, Texas, Villanova, and Houston. I want to revisit this list on an ongoing basis. And my question to you right now, Carter, is do we need to cross anybody off this list?
I think we do need to cross some people off this list, but I don't know if me and you had the same teams that we want to cross off this list.
Okay. We're going to have to work through that in real time, my friend.
Okay. So I know that you want to cross off Houston, correct?
I do want to cross off Houston.
See, I'm not crossing off Houston. What are you basing your crossing off of Houston off of?
Houston has turmoil happening within the program right now, Carter.
They do. They do. A preseason player of the year, I believe Caleb Mills is transferring.
Caleb Mills is transferring, and now Caleb Mills has not had the start to the season that many expected him to have. You could call it a case of the Mark Watts is going on. I don't know. But
stop the pod.
It is what it is. He's out of the program. He's gone. Houston is 9-1 as of this recording. They just beat Wichita State last night. It was a good win, but Wichita State did have an early lead in that game. But I tell you, Cart, Houston lost a 1-point game to Tulsa.
Yeah. Did you see the end of that game, though?
I did see the end of that game.
That was some bullshit.
One could say. And look, I don't want to be too reactionary. It's a 1-point loss, but I'm ready to cross Houston off. I don't like the combination of losing Caleb Mills with losing to Tulsa under any circumstances.
Okay. I'm going to look at it from another angle, though. I think this is a situation where this team was really doing better, honestly, without Caleb Mills maybe in the role that he had last year. And because of that, they're kind of maybe shedding some. Though Caleb Mills is a talented player, don't get me wrong. He's going to have a lot of suitors, by the way. You'll probably see him at a pretty big school next year. But
I know a couple schools that could use a guard.
Yeah. All right. Let's stop, because between that and the Mark Watts comment, that's a little too many, like right in a short period of time.
I mean, you gave me 2. I just gave you 2 back. You gave me Hancock.
Okay.
Okay,
move
fine.
On to the pod. Like I was saying, I think it's
Bring
a
up
situation
DiVincenzo. I'm quitting.
Oh my God. It's a situation where I think that they're kind of losing a player, though a good player, who is not with what the team's vision is or kind of what the goals are moving forward as a team and as a unit. Now, you say, let's look at Texas Tech, though. Now moving on, they lose a player to transfer the transfer portal today, and Damari Burnett, who hasn't played as much, really talented player. But Texas Tech has struggled lately. They've had a lot of games where they haven't even come close to covering the spread. They had a loss to Oklahoma State in overtime, and they kind of look shaky. And though against everything that I believe in, I don't want to go against Chris Beard and a team in March. And as much as I like this Texas Tech team, it just hasn't clicked to this point where I think it needs to. And I don't want to do it, but I might have to cross them off the list. And I know you don't want to.
I might be ready to come around. I said I didn't want to, but I might be ready to come around. I have a lot of Damari Burnett thoughts, by the way. Damari Burnett, a guy that was heavily recruited by the Michigan Wolverines. Juwan Howard had a pretty existing relationship. For a while, they were thought to be a serious contender in the recruitment. Texas Tech was kind of floating on the perimeter. I believe for a while it was an Alabama-Michigan race, and then Texas Tech comes out of nowhere. Damari said he wanted to play a really up-tempo system. That's not Texas Tech. He's coming off the bench all year. He's playing, I think, like 12 minutes a game. He's shooting terrible percentages. He's shooting 20% from the floor. He's shooting 17% from 3. Now, he's shooting great from free throw, so you got to think like the shot is there, but he doesn't pass the eye test either. I mean, when he gets in the game, yeah, it's a short spurt, but he's not really controlling the floor, commanding the game, letting it come to him. It's sort of like they're I always say this, but it's like they're playing 5-on-4 a little bit when he's out there. So I just don't see it with him. Michigan fans are all over him. They want him to transfer to Michigan for next season, which I actually don't really want that. I won't be upset if he comes to Michigan, but I'm very pro Frankie Collins, so I don't really want to do anything to piss him off as a recruit. So I don't know. I don't like where this Texas Tech team is at, though. I agree with you.
Right. And it's, I want to really like this team because they have the pieces, but outside of Damari Burnett, I mean, Micah Peavy's kind of really exploded onto the national scene this year. I think he's an NBA prospect at this point, maybe the most promising NBA prospect on that team. And the only thing that I can really, if I was a Texas Tech fan, look forward to is the fact that no one on this team, I think, has played their best basketball up until this point as a unit, as one. It would be a situation where Santos Silva's playing well, but Mac McClung is having a shooting slump, or Terrence Shannon is playing extremely well, and Mac McClung's in a slump, or vice versa. It hasn't really come together yet. But when you have a coach like Chris Beard and you do have the pieces, it's something that could definitely come together, and they could play their best basketball at some point. But at this point, if I had to cross a team off the list, they haven't shown me enough, and they lost games, and they have not played well against some really, really bad teams, honestly. So, by that criteria, we have to cross them off this list.
Hold up. So, First of all, Chris Beard had a press conference today to address the Damari Burnett situation, and he wore a Tupac T-shirt to the press conference. So that alone, I'm willing to give him an extension of my belief based on that. I like that. I like that move. Second.
When was the last time you listened to a Tupac song?
a very long time ago, but I respect it. That's not what I expect from Chris Beard. The fact that he's willing to go there publicly in a moment where you got to listen to the press conference. Actually, he kind of trashed Amari Burnett. It's pretty funny, but I'm not willing to write Texas Tech off yet because to everything you just said, it's all about right now. And this list is not about how are they playing right now. It's about, are we going to see a vision come together come March? If it was about right now, I think we could cross Illinois off the list. There's an argument for crossing Tennessee off the list. There's an argument for crossing Wisconsin off the list after that loss to Maryland last week. So
Yeah.
I don't base this list off of that. I base it off of if things came together, could we see it happening in March? And with Texas Tech, I still see it even without Amari Burnett. With Houston, I don't see it based on the last 3 games I've watched.
Okay, so you know what? Let's talk the teams that lost recently. So let's go to Tennessee. And I actually want to bounce a theory off you because it sounds crazy in my head, but for some reason I can't get on board with playing the 2 big man kind of system. But Tennessee, you have John Fulkerson, who is a SEC Player of the Year candidate, a really good player. But sometimes, I don't know, watching that last game, him and Ease Pond playing together sometimes, like to me, I feel like if they made like putting Ease Pond at the 5 and then just playing like 4 guards or 4 wings, something in that combination, do you think that could make Tennessee a better team? I mean, defensively, this team is great. I think like that's undeniable. So it's kind of hard to pull them out of this list because the defense is going to be there. If they figure it out offensively, it could be really great. This might be a situation where they finally played a team that wasn't trash. I mean, they played Missouri, who was pretty much the only good team, but the rest of their non-conference was absolutely garbage. So, I kind of want to know your thoughts on Tennessee and where they're moving forward, because I like to keep them on the list if I'm doing it.
Yeah, I think what we knew about Tennessee through the non-conference was that we knew they could demolish terrible teams because they were presented with about 6 games against awful, awful, awful teams like Ken Pom 300 plus teams. Shout out Ken Pom. But they handled those games, 30 to 40 point victories, right? And that's what you expect an elite team to do. And they looked like an elite team. Then they got into SEC play and they were presented with opportunities against Missouri where they went on the road and demolished Missouri. I mean, that was one of the most impressive victories any team's had all year. Mm-hmm. Understandable you would come off that game and maybe have a little bit of a letdown game. They lose at home to Alabama, an Alabama team that has talent. Javon Quinterly, John Petty is somehow still at Alabama. He was there. I feel like he was there 2 years before Colin Sexton got there, but he's still there.
Shout out.
And then they actually impressed me. They didn't cover in the home win against Arkansas, but Arkansas is a good team. I love their style of play. Musselman, I'm a huge fan of his as a coach. Moses Moody is arguably the most talented player in the SEC to me this season. So I don't know. I like what I've seen from Tennessee. I agree with you that their parts feel a little bit weird to me. Honestly, they remind me a lot of kind of the middle tier John Calipari Kentucky teams, where on paper you can name 7 different guys on this team that are great players individually. But then when you actually talk about how they fit together or you look at them individually, like, do you really want Pons and Fulkerson on the floor together, like you said? Yeah. Is Vescovi at point really the best thing for a team with Jaden Springer?
Right.
Like, there are questions here. And I think I've made this joke to you in the past where Kentucky teams felt to me like it was a bunch of 2K created players. Tennessee is that team for me this year. They've got the Euro transfer point guard with bleach blonde hair. They've got the couple 5-star recruits that come off the bench. They've got the white boy post player that's grit and grind. They've got the DK Metcalf muscles forward. Like, they're fun on paper. They're all talented players. I just don't know how they fit together at this point.
And for all those who put a bet on when Greg would mention 2K in your pods and took the under, go ahead and cash your ticket now. Honestly, I thought it'd be sooner, but you did. You eventually got around to it. But
hey, look, I have my go-tos. Ken Pom and 2K are gonna be consistent go-tos.
Hey, consistency is great, but I agree with you. It's something about the team just not gelling together. Maybe the pieces not fitting exactly how they need to. So I want defense wins. All right. So, and they have the potential offensively as well. So I think they come together and they deserve to stay on the sleepers contender list. Who else on there are you thinking about that maybe doesn't deserve to be there?
I mean, I think everyone for now deserves to be here. If we're talking, can we see them winning a title? I mean, we're not crossing Gonzaga off, Baylor, Tennessee, Illinois, Wisconsin, Kansas.
Got to shout out Texas, man. We've been on Texas, and we talked about Texas as a
Yeah.
team.
Yeah.
And that was a huge win at Fog Allen Fieldhouse. Absolutely destroyed Kansas and looked great doing so. And didn't have a letdown in their last game against a Iowa State team that played really tough against Baylor. Also played them very tough, and they still got out of there with a win. So this Texas team is rolling. Shaka Smart has a Jerry curl.
He has hair. He has hair.
I'll never get used to it, but that Texas team is really, really good.
Look, Shaka was on the hot seat, and then he grew out his hair, and now he's maybe coach of the year.
Yeah, he said they can't fire me if they can't notice me.
Look, I love this Texas team. Greg Brown, to me, is a freshman that deserves way more national recognition than he's getting. To me, he's honestly one of the top 5 freshmen probably in college basketball this year. He's been great, and they've got senior guards. Matt Coleman, I love him. I just like the experience this Texas team brings back. And I think I've told you my theory before, where what I'm looking for in teams that can win in March is a top 10 Ken Pom defense, which I don't know what Texas's number is at off the top of my head, but they're up there. Tennessee is number 1. I know that. Mixed with either NBA guard play or with senior guards.
And they have a senior point guard, Matt Coleman, who's hooping this year.
They've got experience, man. I like everything Texas brings to the table. And yeah, right now they look like the Big 12 favorite.
Yeah, for sure. And I think when we went over it, we were like, damn, do we have too many Big 12 teams in here? Because I think we had, 3, 4?
That is the thing. We have a problem. We have Baylor, Kansas, Texas Tech, and Texas in our list of 10 right now.
See, and I think Baylor and Texas are absolutely cemented on this list.
Kansas has to be there too, though. They could easily figure it out.
Yeah, they do have your favorite player, Scooter Braun. Had another good game last night, by the way.
No, they have Jalen Wilson, who's a problem for the entire country. But so look, I don't think we need to get too aggressive in crossing teams off, because the last thing I want to do is get to March with 2 teams on our list and say these are the only 2 teams that can win a title. Like, that's just not true.
Come down to it, we have Baylor and Gonzaga there at the end.
If this list is to really say who can win a title, I think it's fair to have 10 on the list right now. I just want to cross Houston off the list.
Okay. All right. So let's just maintain the list this week.
So you're unwilling to take Houston off the list at this point?
No, I'm done if we take Houston off. I'm out.
Why? What are you so attached to with this Houston team?
Bro, they got literally, when we talk about like teams that can make a run in March, they have it. They got killer guard play. They have a very underrated front court, a front court that doesn't really need like shine either. They're willing to do all the dirty work, the things that maybe the guards lack, maybe defensively. They pick up on that. I love Quinn Grimes. I love Marcus Sasser. I love the Trey.
You love Marcus Sasser.
I love Marcus Sasser.
You love Marcus Sasser.
I love Houston.
Tell me what you love about Marcus Sasser.
He's a bucket. He's a killer. Like, they just got guards that are killers. Jarreau is a killer. He'll get a tech every other game. I always support that. Shout out Mike Conley for never getting a tech in his NBA career. Shame on you. But like, it's just like, you can't. This Houston team, they got dogs. And like, I'm not counting out dogs when it comes to March. And they got old dogs who can hoop as well. So this team, they got what I need. When you got a backcourt like that, combined with a front court willing to beat someone's ass and do the dirty work, I mean, I'm not going against that in March. And a great coach in Kelvin Sampson. So
I don't think we're ever going to get to a point where we agree on them. Maybe they swing back around, but it's like, there's not going to be anything, I don't think, in conference play that gets us to a point where we cross them off, because they're going to win games in conference play.
Are you
right?
Are you maybe alluding to hashtag wait and see on Houston?
But I hate wait and see. I'm so not team wait and see. I'm team, if we see it right now with our eyes, we don't need extenuating circumstances to tell us.
If we cross them off, can we bring them? If we cross them off, can we bring them back?
No. When you cross the team off, they're gone.
Then I'm not willing to cross them off. I think that's unfair.
Okay, so we're gonna hold still with our 10.
Let's hold still. Let's give it another week or two.
Okay, let's at least give a consensus Cart and G like power rankings. We both got Gonzaga 1, Baylor clear 2, right?
Yep.
Where would you go from there? Because I do think there's been movement since last time we had, I think, Tennessee number 3.
I think Texas is up to 3.
I'm fine with Texas 3.
Texas 3.
Literally, I'm making Google Doc adjustments as we speak, folks.
Okay.
Texas is
Yeah.
3. And again, this isn't who's playing right now. This is potential to win a title.
That we made off a list the last episode. We're not adding any teams. We're just crossing off.
So again, this is not our top 10 teams right now, because if this is top 10 teams right now, folks, trust me, Michigan is in the top 5 for me. Gonzaga 1, Baylor 2, Texas 3. I mean, who do you believe in most next? I'd probably put Tennessee 4.
I'd probably put Tennessee 4.
I think I put Illinois 5.
I think at this point you got to put Wisconsin 5. Even off the loss.
You think Wisconsin's potential is higher than Illinois?
No, but I'm talking about right now.
But we're talking our perception of their chance to win a title. Whose is higher? I think it's Illinois.
All right, Illinois to me then, if that's the case.
Illinois 5, Wisconsin, I'm fine at 6. I would go Kansas 7, Villanova 8, and then Texas Tech and Houston at the bottom.
To be petty, can we swap Texas Tech and Houston?
We can put Texas Tech last.
Let's go.
We can do that.
Cart wins.
My last Texas Tech piece, I said this to you via text like a month ago. Micah Peavy someday will be an NBA lottery pick.
And I'm not mad at that at all.
I'm a little mad at myself for it. I think that's a little bit hot, but okay.
I'll be here. Hey, I'm always here to support you, man.
I appreciate that. All right. So we've got Ken Pom.
Yeah, let's get to the people what they probably clicked on this episode for, or listened to this for.
Yeah,
the man.
I hope there's hundreds of people listening to this who are just like, who are these idiots?
I clicked on this shit to listen to Ken Pom, and I'm looking at some ugly light-skinned dude and some white dude with a car hat heart on. What the hell did I just click? This is clickbait.
So our conversation with Ken Pom was a very fun one, very enlightening one. We talked everything from the origin story of KenPom.com, how he feels about the way he is perceived in the world of college basketball, big name players and coaches that have brought up his name to the media, and what's new, what's next, and what's in store for KenPom.com going forward. I highly recommend, I say this on the podcast as well, but subscribe to KenPom.com. If you have seen me and my daily picks gambling videos, you know how much of a Bible and a source of information KenPom is for me. It's just a great way to learn about the game of basketball. And there's not many people on earth who are more intelligent or know more about this lovely game that we all care about than Mr. Ken Pomeroy.
Yeah.
So
Greg said it all. I mean, I'd even go as far as say Ken Pom is a pillar of college basketball, to be honest. I mean, even at the inception of when we were even talking about making this podcast, we've been referencing Ken Pom since we, basically started talking basketball at all. So it's a really interesting conversation. You really learn a lot about him as a person as well. Great listen. So I'm really excited about this and really excited for everyone to hear this. So it's going to be exciting.
That it is. Let's go straight to it. Today, we've got a guest who needs no introduction. I'm assuming everyone has heard of this man, but I am so excited to have him on the other end of the line. We've got Mr. Ken Pomeroy. Ken, how's it going?
It's going great. Thanks for having me on your show.
Absolutely. So, Ken, I just kind of teased you before we clicked record here and gave you the background on us, but I also want to give any listeners of the show a little background on us. If you're a new listener to us and you don't know sort of how Carter and I approach basketball, Carter is very much a player's mentality. He played college ball. I'll kind of let you get into that, but we've had many a conversation over the years where, I love my stats. I'm an analytics guy. So I'm really excited to get to talk to Ken about sort of how he has become the star in the analytics world that he is. But I also want to give Carter an opportunity to learn a little bit today from this conversation.
Oh yeah, definitely. Looking at this as a learning. I mean, of course, I know Ken and his work, but like G stated, kind of being from more of the basketball player perspective, analytics is kind of a new thing when I started playing. So I stopped playing 5 years ago, and it just kind of started being implemented. Our coaching staff, I played at Albion College. They started kind of using it more and more. So I'm, definitely interested to learn more about it and kind of learn a little bit more about Ken Pom, because it kind of seems like you're kind of an enigma at times, but have such a large stature to you as well.
Yeah, well, I also want to stress that we don't need to necessarily separate the players from the analytics. Like, there's definitely some crossover, I think, and even though I would never expect people on the court to be thinking about analytics in real time as they're playing, I think every player at some point thinks about the stats or production or something in a way that like relates to analytics in ways that they don't even think of. So so I just make that point just to start.
I know Carter was asking for his box scores after his Albion games. How many points I get? How many boards I get?
So it wouldn't be the only person.
Wasn't much in there either. Just throwing that out there.
Hey, don't downplay it. All right, so let's get into a little origin story, if you don't mind, Ken. So your site dates back to 2002 as far as archives go for yearly stats. There's information you can get on the history of Ken Pomeroy and how you got into the game of basketball, but how did you sort of rise to this person who's become such a big figure in analytics? Was that always a goal, or was this something where you kind of just started doing it and realized there was such a need for it that it grew organically?
Yeah, it was more the latter. Early 2000s was really a time where the internet was kind of taking shape, and there was some really good content online with respect to baseball and people writing about it from an analytical standpoint. And I wasn't a huge baseball fan, but I found that writing like really engaging. And this is before Google, so I was like, there's obviously got to be somebody doing this for college basketball. My favorite sport. Like, who's doing it? Let me figure out who that is. I'll find it eventually. And after like weeks of searching, never found that person. So I just kind of started doing it myself. And not with really any expectations that I would get to the point I am today, where it's my full-time job. But I always hoped there'd be like kind of a small following, and initially there was a small following, which was certainly motivating. But that's really how it got started. It was just, I guess, trying to fill a need. Personally, it was really selfish, but I needed a need filled, and so I just filled it myself.
So did it start? I mean, your site is so robust now as far as everything you track. I mean, you can go through it. If you're a subscriber to kenpom.com, there's literally pretty much limitless options of what you want to look at, whether it's games, player stats, projections, etc. Where did you start as far as priorities go on what's important to track from a metric standpoint?
So I was really influenced by a guy by the name of Dean Oliver, who is currently on the Washington Wizards staff. And he wrote a book that came out 2001-ish, 2002, somewhere around there, called Basketball on Paper, which if you want to just kind of scratch the surface of basketball analytics, you're not really well-versed in it. It's a great introduction to the field. He speaks kind of writes in simple terms. And he came up with this idea called the 4 factors, which, makes a lot of sense. It's basically, that your offense can be explained by 4 things. One is shooting, one's turnovers, one's rebounding, and one is free throw shooting. And basically those things, are in the box score, and you can use those to figure out, kind of the components of your offense or your defense. And so that was my focus initially, looking at offensive and defensive efficiency, and then looking at the 4 factors. And, if you want to see like the origin of my site, you can go onto the Internet Archive and pull up my site from 2002. And if you think my site looks simple today, it was really kind of a train wreck back then, but it had the information on there, and that was like enough to get people interested.
I can imagine the wild west of the pre-Google internet days, the way the site looked, and probably the people that were visiting the site as well. But you've become renowned for looking at tempo-free stats, which is something that I'm relatively new to. I really started getting serious at looking at, advanced metrics on a tempo-free basis a couple of years ago. But I think once you start looking at stats that way, it is going to totally change the way you approach teams and players that are successful versus teams and players that aren't. How quickly did you realize tempo was critical to what you were doing?
Pretty quickly. I mean, that was like my main motivation to getting started, was that there was this issue with tempo just influencing all sorts of stats. And so you'd watch a game and you'd see, an announcer talk about how this team is first in the country in scoring offense or whatever. But invariably the team that leads the country in scoring offense is a team that plays at a pretty fast pace as well. Like they normally have a good offense, but they also have a lot of possessions in their games. And so, yeah, I was just really itching to like separate those two things out and see who had the best offense on a points per possession basis, which is really what you want to know. I think the whole, my motivation for diving into stats and analytics is kind of to add an element of fairness in terms of judging things. And so it's really not fair to judge an offense by how many points they score per game, because, the Wisconsins of the world often have great offenses, but they don't have many possessions. And so they'll never be judged well by that kind of metric. So from a fairness standpoint, you really want to strip away a team's style and just look at, hey, when they have the ball, how lethal is their offense or how good is their defense when they don't have the ball. And that was kind of an early goal for me, for sure.
Basically, there's probably a lot of people out there that years ago would look at a Tony Bennett Virginia team that's scoring 65 points a game and say, well, their offense stinks. No, that's not it. They're totally doing a different style of play. So Ken, I want to talk a little bit about the public perception of your site, and I guess you as an entity as well. Cause I think honestly, my perception of it, and you can correct me if I'm totally wrong here, is that you carry this sort of mystique, almost like an impressive, like basketball Wizard of Oz type thing, where everyone is like just mystified by this persona of Ken Pom, and you've become quote unquote the stats guy. And I know coaches and players alike have taken notice. What's that like? And is that something that you appreciate or you don't like?
It depends on how that kind of stuff is used. Sometimes, people who, every year there's kind of a new part of my customers. Not customers isn't the right word, because these people usually aren't paying for my work, but people who just, become exposed to my work, who don't really know my background or know my history or know my philosophy or anything like that. And, they kind of, are critical of my work in ways that doesn't make sense. They assume that I'm putting these ratings forward as gospel and they can't be challenged or anything like that. Or they assume that that's all I do is write website code and I don't watch games, or I'm not a fan, or I'm just looking at the game in this very clinical way. And, that stuff isn't really true, but in general, I'm very appreciative of like all the people that are interested in my work, and obviously even more appreciative from the coaching and player side, people that are in the game that use my work. Like that's ultimately what gives my work, what gave my work early on credibility was the kind of the coaches, citing my work in press conferences and things like that. And I think it brought some of the naysayers in the media along that otherwise would have been, much less receptive to what I was doing.
What's it like when you watch a basketball game? Like, what are you exactly looking for? What are you kind of measuring? I mean, are you watching it? Is it hard to separate kind of watching it as a fan, but also watching and analyzing the game?
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, I think most of the time I'm watching a game just like a fan would, like just for entertainment purposes. Like that's ultimately why you get hooked on the sport, is that it's like really entertaining to watch. But there certainly are times where I'm watching a game and, I'll just see a guy take a shot and, a challenge shot from the elbow or something like that. And I'm like, wow, that's like, a really poor shot, or a really, a good job by the defense or whatever.
Those are Carter's favorite
so I do,
shots, by the way.
Love contested elbow jumpers.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's funny, like, in the days when I played pickup ball, like that was my favorite shot too, because I couldn't get shots at the rim and I wasn't a very good perimeter shooter. So, I was like the walking example of why those shots are taken. Like if you're not a very dynamic offensive player, like you end up taking crappy shots. And so, I do watch the game from that standpoint as well. But it's not like I'm breaking down numbers a lot when I'm watching a game. Like if I'm at a game, if I'm on press row or something, like I'll definitely have the stat monitor up and I'll be, monitoring things from that standpoint and looking for little nuggets. But for the most part, I'm not overloading my head with like a lot of analytical concepts when I'm watching a game.
Got it. That makes sense. So kind of along the lines of that question, it's interesting to me to think like, okay, content creators in general, this is a unique word to pick to call your site and everything that you do content, but anyone that creates something, like you'll get widely varying answers on, do you also consume that site or that content? Do you like listening to your own voice? Do you listen to your own songs if you're a musician? do you go to your own site and like really interpret the data beyond what you've already created here? Like, will you look at your top 25 or whatever the ratings are and kind of look at this and be like, oh, it's interesting that this team is so high. That doesn't make sense.
Yes, absolutely. I do that all the time. And that is part of the way I watch the game, by the way. Like, if a team is, ranked in my top 25 that everybody else thinks is garbage, like I'm really intrigued by that team. And I'm probably going to watch their next game. I'm probably going to watch their next 5 games because I want to see what people think. And I want to see what my computer is catching on to. So, and that goes for a player level as well. Sometimes I'll run across a player who looks like they've been really productive this year and nobody's talking about them. For some reason, they're not in the starting lineup or whatever. And, I want to watch that player and see what am I missing? What are the numbers missing? And so that does drive a lot of my viewing habits during the season.
I'm happy right now because my Michigan Wolverines just made it to 10th for the first time this season, cracked your top 10 on KenPom.com. We've got Hunter Dickinson, freshman phenom, who I believe is 8th in the KenPom Player of the Year rankings right now. What jumps out at you if there was something either in the team rankings or the player rankings right now is like something that doesn't feel right to you as a watcher of the game? Is there a team that might be overrated, underrated, anything like that right now?
Yeah, I guess, I'm not necessarily going to jump out and say, hey, this team's overrated or underrated, but the teams that I do like, like Tennessee has like been a really interesting team this year where, people have kind of had jumped onto them after they crushed Missouri. And, there was a lot of talk about them being a top 5 team or whatever. And, here's one of Ken's like rules of basketball analysis, especially in college basketball, but like always wait until a team loses before you give any strong opinions about them. Because it's obviously easy to jump on the bandwagon when a team's undefeated. And now that Tennessee has lost, like, I don't know how people feel about them, but personally, I'm still really intrigued by their lineup. Like they got this great mix of like experienced players and kind of 5-star guys. And they got a bunch of length out on the court and a bunch of athleticism. And they obviously play this like really fun to watch defensive style that has been very effective this year. The number 1 ranked defense right now in my system. So they're a team that I'm still kind of itching to follow, the next 2 or 3 weeks now that people have kind of backed off of them after they lost to Alabama. I throw Clemson in there as well, just because they're like, so they're 18th in my system. And I know they're ranked in the AP poll as well. I don't know exactly where, because I don't follow the AP poll that closely, but they're another team that like, their name, the name Clemson, like they just don't have a lot of basketball tradition. And so I think people are a little hesitant to jump on board, but they have the number 2 ranked defense in my system. And, they've only lost once on the road to Virginia Tech. So they're another team that, I'm kind of curious to follow as time goes on. They're a team that does also have a very experienced lineup and has kind of a high ceiling player in Amir Sims. And so they're a team that, if they didn't have the name Clemson, if they had the name, North Carolina, like people might be like, pretty high on them or higher on them than they are now. So those are a couple of teams that I think are worth watching in terms of maybe being, I don't know if underrated is the word, but teams that have a little bit of mystery surrounding them right now.
You had a lot of gems in there that were like music to my ears, talking about it's hard to get on a team's bandwagon until they lose a game. Carter, that's basically what you've been telling me about Michigan for a month plus.
You know what? Yeah, great minds think alike, So, me and Greg personally, we have, kind of dabbled in sports gambling a little bit. I know a lot of sports gamblers reference your website and your rankings as well, even, up against other people's rankings and kind of use it to, kind of compare spreads and things like that. With gambling and like sports gambling kind of growing in the world today, have you seen like an uptick in maybe usage on your website, or is that something that you might kind of go further into maybe in the future?
Yeah, it's hard to track like who uses my website. I obviously know it's, popular with gamblers. So, they make up a decent percentage of subscribers, but I will say like certainly one of my goals early on was to make predictions for games, 2 months from now, because, I do think like the Vegas point spread is it's historically been proven, like it's the best predictor of future events. So the problem is, especially 50 years ago, you didn't get Vegas spreads for a lot of like lower level games. Now you can get them for pretty much every game. But back then, you only got them for like the top half of college basketball. for the most part. And you obviously don't get them for more than a day or two in advance. So if I want to know, hey, Michigan against Indiana, what is the spread going to look like in a month? Like I have a reference for that. So that's really where like my gambling angle comes from. I don't really plan to necessarily tap into that market any more than I have been, which is really like unintentionally for the most part. You're obviously not necessarily using the predictions from my site to beat the point spread. If that was the case, I'd be charging you a lot more than $19.95 for access. So I think there may be some information in there on the teams that is useful from a gambling standpoint or making predictions. But it's kind of where I stand on that.
Yeah, I think you may have an opportunity going forward because, like Carter said, we dabble in the gambling world. I'm sure a lot of people listening to our podcast are people that follow us for gambling picks. And just with the way that whole industry is going to grow. I mean, we do daily picks videos on Twitter. Carter and I both do, where we give out 3 games a day if there's a good list of games that day. And it's very rare that I go a 2-minute video per day without mentioning Ken Pom or this team's ranked on Ken Pom. This is the spread on this matchup on Ken Pom. And I must say my record's pretty solid this year. So there could be an expansion opportunity for you there.
Well, I do think, to me, it's interesting, the cases where there is a difference. Like usually the spread and my prediction are pretty close. But the real interesting cases are the ones where either the spread is pretty far from my prediction, trying to figure out what's going on there, or the cases where like people are surprised by the spread and it matches my prediction. Like you'll occasionally see that. Not, usually that has a lot to do with like home court advantage. It's like that really came up earlier this year when Illinois played Missouri. Like there are a lot of like Missouri fans, I think, who are like, why is this, I think Missouri might've been a 1-point underdog or even a 1-point favorite or something. And they're like, why is the spread so close? And you look at my site and like it had, anticipated that the spread would be close. And, obviously Missouri won that game, but those cases are pretty fascinating to me as well. Just like how people tend to, they tend to not necessarily, they tend to overrate maybe 1 or 2, extreme performances from a team and use that to judge them. And then, really you look at like Vegas spreads or my predictions and it does a better job of treating the outliers appropriately, which is to not give them too much weight.
Yeah. Well, we got a great example of it tonight that our listeners will love too. Rutgers is traveling to the Breslin Center to play Michigan State. Rutgers is 19th in KenPom.com right now. Michigan State is 50th. The Vegas spread started, I believe, at Michigan State -1. I think it's risen up to -2.5 latest that I saw. Yep. So, home court advantage, maybe some name recognition, some Tom Izzo, people thinking he's just going to figure it out. But man, this Rutgers team's been tough. And I said it on my daily picks video today, but I'm all over Rutgers. And I believe you've got them at a Rutgers 1-point victory for the prediction tonight. So,
yeah, that's a great case as well. Like you'd think, so I'm Michigan State at 50th, and they played like the 50th best team, honestly. Like they were a team, when they lost to Northwestern, as I said, I don't follow the AP poll too closely, but they were somewhere in the mid-20s in my system when they lost to Northwestern, and they were
still are. I think they're 23rd in the AP poll
somehow,
today.
Somehow they're still ranked. But I think there's some, AP poll aside, like I think there's a decent line of thinking that they're not the 50th best team. They're a little bit better. They played some of their worst games so far, and they should improve. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Like generally speaking, I do like I said, I'm intrigued by those cases where the Vegas spread is a little bit different than mine, and this is one of those cases, and I can see why. Like you can see, ultimately Michigan State starting to win some games. They're not going to go, 5-15 in Big Ten play. Right. So this is if they're if they're going to get back on track, like this is a game that they figure to win. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
We could go 5-15. I mean, had some tough ones this year.
We do. I have a feeling I'm losing a podcast host if that happens. So
yeah, you probably are, to be honest.
I wanted to ask you about a couple specific parts of the model that you have today, and you mentioned home court advantage as one, and obviously COVID has totally shaken that. What's the perception of how much that's changed within the last year without crowds at these games?
Yeah, it's really like a tricky thing to measure, but it seems like it's roughly so. In the past, home court advantage was around 3.5 points per game in conference play, and it's probably down to around 2, somewhere between 2.5, somewhere in there. I mean, so far this season, home teams have won 55% of conference games, and the past 4 seasons combined, that number has been 60%. So, converting that to points is a little tricky. Just having a straight value for points in every game is a little bit tricky for home court advantage, because there's some evidence that it's more important in closer matchups than it is in lopsided matchups. But, it's somewhere maybe slightly better than half of what it used to be. So it still exists, but it's definitely less of a factor. And that is, good news for like the best teams in a conference. Certainly a team like Gonzaga, we're talking about them going undefeated, and it's like perfect year for them to do that because A, the season's shorter, and B, there's no home court or less home court advantage. So when they're going on the road, less chance for them to get upset. It really does help the favorites a little bit this year.
That's why I got Gonzaga running the. I think they run the table this year, to be honest.
Yeah, we did
obviously it's set up well for them to do that in conference play. Whether they can run through the NCAA tournament, I think is going to be a lot more challenging, but we don't even know what the NCAA tournament is going to look like at this point. So we'll see.
Right. We did a whole Gonzaga versus the field conversation on a previous episode. And it seems that the media is really taken to that. Although I am still very much in the camp of it's Gonzaga and Baylor versus the field. And I feel a little backed up by that because there's a 4-point gap between Baylor and the number 3 team in your rankings. You've got Gonzaga 1, but Baylor's not far behind. So would you lean more to my side of that conversation, or do you think Gonzaga is a clear number 1?
No, I mean, I think Gonzaga is number 1, but I do think Baylor is closer than people are giving them credit for. It's really interesting this year to me. Like normally the roles are reversed. So, Gonzaga is the team that's really good, but people dismiss because of their schedule, and unfairly so. And this year, obviously Gonzaga played everybody they could in non-conference. And Baylor's had a pretty weak schedule, and the beginning of their conference schedule has been, pretty weak as well. They've already played Kansas State and Iowa State, who are the 2 worst teams in their league. So they haven't played the toughest schedule, and people are kind of discounting them because of that. But the way they've played against that schedule is consistent with a team that's really, really good. And I do think Gonzaga is, a little bit better than Baylor, but I think that gap is a lot closer than people think right now.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to watch it play out. I'm itching for that game to be played. I know it got canceled or postponed. I don't know.
It doesn't look good. We'll have to hopefully that'll be played in March. I think that's the only chance for that to happen.
Yeah, I'm with that. I want to do a little segment here. So I am convinced that you are the most interesting Wikipedia page in college basketball. There are 3 facts that I wrote down here that there's one that I know is true. 2 of these I have a hard time, not hard time believing are true, but I could see either being true or false here.
Some of them are false on Wikipedia. I'm just going to
So I'm going to go through these 3, and I want you to tell me, is this true? And if it is true, give us a little background on, the story behind it. Number 1, you worked with the Houston Rockets and you teamed up with Daryl Morey.
Sort of true, mostly false, but yeah, I did have a brief dalliance with the Rockets back in the mid 2000s. When I started my site, there was really no other resource for advanced college stats, and their organization was obviously ahead of the curve in terms of recognizing the value of those stats in terms of preparing for the draft. So we did have some conversations, and you never really had a formal arrangement in terms of working for them, but yeah, there were a few months there where I was, providing them with data for, I think it was the 2006 draft.
Okay. Well, we'll count that as working with the Houston Rockets then. If you've influenced Daryl Morey at all, I give you a ton of credit.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I totally believe you did. All right. Number 2 on this list, peers, this is word for word from Wikipedia. Peers have taken to calling you, quote, Dr. Popo, unquote, because of your possession by possession stance.
Yeah, I have no idea where that came from. Totally, that is 100% false. No, yeah, but a great example of how you can't trust everything on Wikipedia.
Don't you worry, I'm taking notes too right now, because you can send a little note over to Wikipedia. I'm gonna get this page fixed up and stuff like that taken off.
Appreciate that.
Gotcha.
All right, and number 3, this is, well, I won't say if it's true or false, but Jim Boeheim ripped you in a press conference last year after a loss.
Right. That's, kind of true. Like he So what was the content of his press conference there? It had to do with I don't know what happened really. It was his press conference. It was a total non sequitur in the press conference, but he's just talking about whoever they lost to, and then he just pivots, like does a 180 and mentions that I somehow have this system where I attribute like defensive responsibility for giving up a shot or something like that, giving up a 3-pointer. I don't know what it was. But,
yeah, I think it was like a player hits a certain percent from a certain spot on the court, and this person's responsible for giving that up. And he was blaming you of all people for like
somehow I was like,
metrics.
Buddy Boeheim had a bad grade or something, and it's not my metric. I guess it does exist, and I believe another Syracuse blog was responsible for publicizing that. And so I can only assume like at some point somebody in the Syracuse athletic department like put this on Jim Boeheim's desk or something. There's no way he's like surfing the internet looking for this stuff. And somehow he connected my name to it, which obviously was a total mistake. But that's how my name ended up in his mouth in a press conference situation. So I guess you can file it under any publicity is good publicity. But it was pretty hilarious to see him rant about me.
Yeah, got to be both flattering to, anytime Jim Boeheim is name dropping you, if that's me, I'm like, oh my God, that's incredible. But a little undeserved on the antagonistic side there. So, well, thank you. Thank you for participating in my Wikipedia Ken Pomeroy game.
No problem.
Makes for a cool story. With the new year starting as well, Ken, and it's the game of basketball is kind of ever changing. And I mean, it's changing honestly at a day-to-day thing. Basketball is just not played the same way it was a couple years ago. It's really that's what really makes the game beautiful, I think. And I kind of just want to get your, kind of outlook on the year that is ahead of us and kind of, what there is to look forward to with, Ken Pom.
Well, I don't know that I have any like, sage words of wisdom on that front. I guess I just, think as far as the season goes, like I'm just thankful that there is a season and, I'm just kind of accepting whatever comes our way. Obviously there are high profile programs that are, struggling to get on the court. So, to me, any game you see on TV that's being executed is a bonus. And that's kind of how I look forward to the season, especially given the fact that, really the eligibility clock is frozen for everybody as well. Like it seems to be how, the NCAA is looking at this season, and it's almost like I don't know what to call it, but kind of a practice season in a way. Like, we're just hoping to get through this, have an NCAA tournament. And overall, I think when we have seen games played, like the quality of basketball has been, just as good as it's ever been. So I think that's fun and encouraging. It's not like the season is a farce in any way necessarily. I mean, obviously the games getting canceled has some impact, but the games that are being played are actual basketball games with people playing, basketball at a high level. And so, that's obviously always going to be entertaining to watch.
For sure. And also I have to ask, there's a viral tweet going around. It was actually by Kevin Durant. And I want to know kind of if you've seen that kind of circulating around the Twitter world. It was, I believe, on one of his Twitter accounts, because, he has his burner Twitter accounts and whatnot. But he referenced that in a basketball argument, who wants to look at graphs,
Right.
Basically. I want to know if you've seen that tweet and kind of get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I saw the tweet, and hey, I totally understand that. It's like, you know what? If I was Kevin Durant, I wouldn't want to look at graphs. Okay. And I mean, part of the reason I do want to look at graphs is that I'm not Kevin Durant. So I take no offense. I never take offense in any comments like that. If people are not into analytics, no big deal. But especially if you're Kevin Durant, like if you become the best at what you do in the world, like why the heck, of course you don't want to look at graphs. Like, why do you want to get bogged down in that? Like, your approach is like proven to work, over your entire life. Like you should have no doubts about that. So yeah, I take zero offense to what that tweet said. And I always find it hilarious when other colleagues of mine start to take offense. Like if Charles Barkley says something, like he'll take shots at analytics all the time. And it's like, come on, man. Charles Barkley's hilarious. Like he's clearly on TV here to entertain us, and he does a very good job at that. Like if you're taking offense, there's analytics takes. Like you need to chill out a little bit.
Hey, I think KD might come around, because if Kyrie Irving wants 10 post-ups a game I mean, we gotta just be clear if that's an efficient shot or not. And my guess is it might not be compared to Kevin Durant with the ball in his hand. So who knows? Maybe he'll come around and be a Ken Pom advocate soon.
Yeah, well, I'm not angling for that. That's for sure.
All right. Well, Ken, thanks for being here. I've got one question before we wrap for you. So going back, you can go all the way back to 2002 in your database. You've got historical player of the year rankings, player efficiency metrics. You've got team efficiency metrics. Give me the best team that you can remember seeing since the inception of your database and the best player, whether this is an eye test thing or whether it's what your system says. I'd be curious to know your answers.
Well, I think the best team has always worked out to be Kentucky in 2015. Obviously, from the purists, a controversial choice because they didn't win the national title. But, just an example of the fact that, in our sport, we have a single elimination tournament. And unlike the NBA, our games are also shorter and only 40 minutes. So, there's obviously potential for upsets. The best player is a little bit more difficult, but I would like to give a shout out to my guy, Alan Williams, who is my favorite player of all time. Played for UC Santa Barbara back in the day. Was really just an amazing player from the analytics side in terms of he just did a little bit of everything, like rebounds and block shots and getting to the free throw line. He didn't shoot threes, but he did everything else really, really well. And was kind of like this obscure player at UC Santa Barbara for 4 years. And, eventually got paid in the NBA, did get a contract. Now I think he's playing in Russia, I believe. But I'll give a shout out to Alan Williams because nobody else will. He'll be a forgotten player in a few years, but he was one of the early guys in my analytics journey that I would never have known about had it not been for kind of crunching the numbers.
Love that.
Love that.
All right. And very last thing, please go on record because I coach a freshman high school basketball team in Michigan. And I'm dying to know, as all of my coaching peers are dying to know, foul up three or no?
Well, I would say in the high school world, definitely not. As you move up the food chain and you're playing teams that might have like 4 or 5 capable 3-point shooters on the floor, then it becomes more of a question. But in any event, do not foul with greater than 8 seconds or fewer than 4 seconds. If you can foul within that 4 to 8 second window, then I think it's at least defensible.
Ken,
that's enough for me.
That's all I needed.
I love it. All right. Well, Ken, thanks so much for being here. If you're listening to this, please consider subscribing to kenpom.com. I can tell you it's going to change your life if you're a basketball fan. I truly believe that. Ken, I know you had a podcast previously. Are you still doing anything like that?
It might come back. This year I didn't do it because I just thought all of my conversations would eventually end up talking about COVID in some way. And so I figured nobody really wants to hear that. And I don't really want to talk about that. So it's on hiatus, still on hiatus, but there's definitely hopes to bring it back next year when things get back to normal.
Love it. Well, I'll be tuned in whenever it returns. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you.
All right. Thanks for having me on,
Ken.
guys.
Appreciate it.